So let's talk about sign diagrams here. Let's say we have the function y equals x plus 2 times x minus 1. And I drew a rough sketch of the graph of what it would look like. And as you can see, it has the roots -2 and 1 because it's in factored form. And let's say we wanted to find a sign diagram. What a sign diagram does is basically it tells you if the graph is positive or negative between the intervals of the roots. So anything less than -2, as you can see, is above the x-axis. So it's positive, that's why we have a plus sign. And then anything in between the roots, -2 and 1, is below the x-axis, which is negative. So that's why we have a negative sign. And then anything to the right of 1 is above the x-axis, which is positive. That's why we have a plus sign here. But let's say we have a function that's weird or like it's too hard to graph, and we just want to find the sign diagram without having the graph in front of our eyes. So let's just say we have another one and we figured out the roots. We have -2 and 1. And then to solve or to find out what if it's plus or negative in these areas, all we have to do is plug in numbers. So let's say we want to find this third first. All we have to do is find a number less than -2, let's just say -3, and plug it into the function. So as x, so -3 plus 2 is -1, and then -3 minus 1 is -4. And as you can see, -1 times -4 is 4, which is positive, so we put a plus sign right there. And then now to find this one, we have to find a number that's between -2 and 1. You could do -1, but I like to do 0 because it's the simplest. So if you have 0, if you plug in x as 0, that's just 2 times -1, which gives you -2. And that's why this is minus sign right there. And then now we have a 1, and we want to figure this one out. Let's just take 2. So if we plug in x as 2, we have 2 plus 2 is 4. And then 2 minus 1 is 1. And we get 4, which means it's plus. Okay, so let's do an example with this. Draw a sign diagram for y equals x squared minus 3x plus 2. So this time we're not given the factors, and we actually have to find them ourselves. So let's just quickly find that. 2, -3. Okay, so this is the same as x minus 2 times x minus 1. So we can use the same process as we did last time, but this time we don't have a graph. So we draw the line, and then this time we have 2 and 1. So remember, whatever number is here is not what the root is. This is actually equal to 0. Remember, when we're factoring, we set it equal to 0. So x is equal to 2 and x is equal to 1. So we write 1 and then 2. So it's still in ascending order, the factors that we use. So now let's find the positive or negative signs between the intervals. So let's find a number that's less than 1. I think the easiest one we can do is just 0. So if we plug in 0, we'll have -2 times -1, which gives us 2. So since 2 is a positive number, we write plus over there. And now let's find a number between 1 and 2. Now, since there's not a whole number, we do have to resort to using fractions, but that's okay. So we can just write 3 over 2, which is 1.5. So 3 over 2 minus 4 over 2, which is the same thing as 2, times 3 over 2 minus 2 over 2. And this gives us -1 over 2 times 1 over 2. And this gives us -1 over 4. So since this is a negative answer, we write negative here. So that means so far what we have is the graph is positive between -infinity to 1. And it's negative from 1 to 2. And let's see what it is for 2. I mean from 2 to infinity. So if we plug in 3, which is the number that's after 2, we'll get 1. 3 minus 2 is 1. And then 3 minus 1 is 2. So 2 times 1 is just 2. So this is a positive. So this is a complete sign diagram. So between -infinity to 1, it's positive. And between the roots, it's negative. And then from 2 to infinity, it's positive again. And I'll just box that in so you know this is the sign diagram. Okay, let's do the second example, which is draw a sign diagram for y equals 4x squared minus 4x plus 1. So this time 8 isn't equal to 1, but it's the same process. So when you factor it out, you should get 2x minus 1 squared. And now, since this is the same thing as that, this is 2x minus 1. So this is the same thing as 2x minus 1 times 2x minus 1. So any way you do it, you should get x equal to 1 over 2. So now, since this is our root, and we make our sign diagram, even though we only have one root, it's okay. So that means the function only hits the x-axis one time, which is at 1 over 2. And this also means that if it hits the x-axis at one point, both sides are going to be the same. So if we find the value for one side, the other side is automatically going to be the same. Because if it isn't, then it's not a quadratic equation or graph. So let's just solve for 0 because that's easier. So 2x minus 1, if we replace it with 0, we'll get 0 minus 1 times 0 minus 1, which is just negative 1 times negative 1. And negative 1 times negative 1 is just equal to 1. Since this is positive, this is also going to be positive. And that's the sign diagram. Okay, so number 3 is a little different. Draw a sign diagram for y equals x plus 2 divided by x minus 1. Now we don't have a quadratic graph anymore. This is rational graph now. But we still do the same thing, except there's one little tricky part. So you might be wondering, how do you find the roots when it's a rational function? Well, all you have to do is take the take the numerator and set equal to 0. So in this case, the numerator is x plus 2. So if we take x plus 2 and set it equal to 0, and we solve for it, we get x equals negative 2, right? So that's our root. But now in the bottom, x minus 1, this is what we have to do to find the asymptote. So this is how we find our vertical asymptote. If we set the denominator equal to 0, so x minus 1 equals 0, we'll get x equals 1. And this is the vertical asymptote. I'll just write that for VA. And then x equals negative 2 is the root. So we can still make a sign diagram using both these values, but we have to do one thing. So we make the line. And now we put negative 2 as a root, as a solid line. But now, since x equals 1 is an asymptote, instead of putting it as a solid line, we put it as a dotted line. And this dotted line represents this as an asymptote where the function doesn't hit at any time. So this is 1. Now, we can do the exact same process to find the pluses and minuses. So if we take negative 3, and if we plug that into as x, we'll have negative 3 plus 2, which is negative 1, divided by negative 3 minus 1 is negative 4, which gives us 1 over 4. So this is positive. And then a value between negative 2 and 1 is just 0. So 2 over negative 1 equals negative 2. So this is minus. And then now anything above 1, let's just take 2. So 2 plus 2 is 4, divided by 2 minus 1 is 1, which is 4, which is positive. So we did the exact same process, except we took the vertical asymptote and made it a dotted line to represent this as an asymptote. Because the function is never going to hit this point. And I'll just box this in again. Okay, so number 4 is basically the same as the last one, except instead of just one binomial, we have 2 on top. So y equals x plus 2 times x minus 1 divided by 3 minus x. So again, let's set the numerator as equal to 0 to find the roots. So x plus 2 equals 0 gives us x equals negative 2. And x minus 1 equals 0 gives us x equals 1. And these two are the roots. And I'll just label that. And then 3 minus x equals 0 is the denominator, and we'll set that equal to 0 to find the vertical asymptote. So negative x equals negative 3, so that means x equals 3. And this is the vertical asymptote. So now if we put this on our sign diagram, we'll have 3 values instead of just 2 or 1. So first we'll have negative 2 at the very left, and then we'll have 1, and then 3, remember, is a dotted line. Okay, and now let's find the value. So let's take negative 3. So if we take negative 3, we'll have negative 3 plus 2, negative 1, times negative 3 minus 1, negative 4, divided by 3 minus negative 3 is 3 plus 3, so 6. And this is going to be 4 over 6. And we don't need to simplify. All we need to know is if it's positive and negative, and we know it's positive, so this is plus right there. And negative 2 and 1, let's just take 0. So a value, so let's just, if we take 0, we'll have 2, negative 1, divided by 3 minus 0 is 3, which is negative 2 over 3, and that is negative. So now let's take a number between 1 and 3, which is, let's just take 2. So 2 plus 2 is 4, 2 minus 1 is 1, 3 minus 2 is 1, which is 4, which is positive, so that's positive over there. And now a number after 3, let's just take the nearest one, 4. So 4 plus 2 is 6, 4 minus 1, 3, and 3 minus 4 is negative 1. So this is negative 18, and since this is negative, we will put negative there, and this is the complete sign diagram. And once again, remember, 3 is not a root, it is a vertical asymptote where the function is never going to hit.